Well, it's always a treat to talk to our next guest, Steve Moore, co-founder of the Committee to Unleash American Prosperity and former Trump economic advisor. I'm Pete Mundo, morning host on KCMO Talk Radio in Kansas City, in for Vince Coglianese. Appreciate him and the WMAL staff for having me in here this afternoon, I should say. Normally I'm on in the morning, and normally I'm talking to Steve Moore in the morning. But, Steve, it's great to talk to you in your backyard in the afternoon. How are you?
Hi, Pete. Good to be with you, and nice to talk to you. I talk to you a lot when you're in Kansas City, so good to be. This is the best talk radio station in Washington D.C. You know that, right, Pete?
That is what I am told there, Steve. So I'm just trying to not mess it up for the next hour or so. That's my only goal here. Steve, you heard the Biden speech today as he really did the same old tired talking points about the economy and really trying to convince the American people that don't believe what you see every day on Main Street. Things are going great. What was your big takeaway from today?
Well, it's putting lipstick on a pig, right? It's trying to convince Americans that what they're feeling in the pocketbook isn't really what's happening in America. When you have 70% of Americans think the country's going in the wrong direction, as I do, and I think you do, and most of the people listening to the show probably do, then, you're trying to it makes Biden seem out of touch with what real Americans are facing right now, which is the average family is about $3,000 or $4,000 poorer because of Biden's policies from when Trump left office. And then the other thing that I found was really interesting, and this has become a theme of Biden in the last few months, is he's taking on not just Trump, but Reaganomics. He must have referred to trickle-down economics 3 or 4 times in that speech today. That was just a pejorative for what Reagan did in the 80s, which, for those old enough to remember, Reagan saved the American economy. I mean, the economy was in wreckage after the 4 years of Jimmy Carter, and we had, double-digit inflation, double-digit unemployment. We had the stock market had fallen, by over 40%, and Reagan came in and the economy exploded. And for some reason, the left feels compelled to pretend like Reagan's policies were not a success and they only benefited rich people and so on. And that's just a science fiction. So completely unimpressed with Biden's policies, and his speech is an uphill struggle for him because most Americans don't agree with what he's saying.
And there was really nothing new in the speech, right, Steve? I mean, it was the same old, I've created 13 million new jobs, and we know that most of those were just replacement jobs from pre-COVID.
Right.
I mean, he did all the same tired talking points. Was there anything new that concerns you from what they could implement economically going forward?
Well, the one thing that he keeps talking about now is this supposed manufacturing boom, and he's talking about all these jobs that have been created by these government programs, like the massive amount of I think we spent, I don't remember the exact number, but it's in the high hundreds of billions of dollars on all these green energy programs. And he's saying, oh, look, we're creating all these jobs with these. Well, Pete, do you remember Solyndra? Remember that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. When this was just an instant replay, folks, of what Obama tried to do when he was going to cause this green energy revolution, and we were going to see all these jobs and all these new businesses, and all of them failed miserably. And you had hundreds of millions of dollars that went into businesses like Solyndra that never created a single job once they went bankrupt. And so these are kind of fake jobs. They're jobs that are there just based on all the money that the federal government's pouring in. And, of course, as everybody knows, where did that money come from? Oh, yeah, we printed it and we borrowed it, so we're going to have to pay that back. So this idea that somehow he's been Mr. Blue-collar worker is just a fantasy.
Well, in the White House, Steve Moore is pushing out, Bidenomics, they claim, has driven $500 billion in private sector investments across the country. And, they always talk about the economy growing from the middle out and the bottom up, Steve. And all I can see is a bottom that's getting poorer because inflation hurts the poor more than the rich.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with that line is that you said it very well, Pete, that inflation is a regressive tax. It hurts poor people the most. I mean, I'm sure, if you're a millionaire or a billionaire, the fact that the cost of milk or the price of pumping up gas, that doesn't affect your life whatsoever. But if you're living on an income of $40,000 or $50,000, and all of a sudden you're seeing these prices spike, you're feeling a real pinch. And so what the real story of what's going on in America right now is we borrowed $6 trillion, and there's been no more president in modern times, probably in American history, that's been more financially reckless than Joe Biden. And with all that borrowed money, they're pouring it into the economy. Let me use a simple example. So, I've been known to sometimes go out and drink a little too much. I know, Pete, you never do that, but sometimes, we'll go out at night and, you're dancing on the tables and you're having a great time and you're whooping it up. And then you can't get out of bed the next morning, right? Yeah. And that's exactly what's happening with the Biden economy. Yeah, you borrow all that money, balloon pops. And it will pop, and there will be a financial crisis at some point if we keep this up. I don't know if it's going to happen in 3 months or, a year and a half or 3 years from now, but you can't do this. You can't keep doing it. And at the same time, the federal government is borrowing record amounts of money. That's, by the way, another lie that Biden told. I mean, we could talk for an hour about this, but he also said, he keeps reiterating this idea that he's Mr. Fiscal Conservative and he's brought the budget deficit down by $1.7 trillion. Did you know just in the last 12 months alone, the national debt rose another $2.1 trillion? And he's going around saying that he's a big fiscal conservative and he's reduced the deficit more than any other president? Does anybody believe that?
You can't unless you don't know the definition of debt versus deficit, which he may not.
That's right. Because
Steve, he said today, and I'll have the guys play it here. Where is it? Clip 6, where he said he didn't know what a supply chain was until he was basically 75 years old. Here it is.
If I said to you 6 years ago, we're worried about a supply chain, you look at me like, huh? Well, I would have looked at you the same way.
I mean, that's not exactly a ringing endorsement for your own economic policies there, Steve Moore.
Well, that's a really interesting admission by the president because, we did this study at the Committee to Unleash Prosperity last year that found that the majority of the people, the high-ranking people that Biden has appointed, including himself and Kamala Harris and so on, majority of them have zero business experience, none. And by the way, I don't mean, Pete, that they don't have experience running a company. Most of them haven't even worked for a company. I mean, think about Joe Biden. He's been in politics for 50 years. How would he know anything about the supply chain? Supply chain, he doesn't even know what that means. So this is the problem. You've got a lot of people like Pete Buttigieg. I mean, he put Pete Buttigieg, the mayor of South Bend, his only qualification is that he's gay, and he put him in as the transportation secretary. And all we've had is and then he's gonna solve the supply chain problem at the docks. I mean, come on. So you've got incompetent people running the economy right now, and it shows. And by the way, we didn't talk a lot about supply chain problems when Trump was president, right? Because we didn't have those problems when Trump was president.
Yeah, now to give Pete Buttigieg a little bit of credit, he did tell us when he got the job that he grew up as a big fan of trains. So that's got to be worth something when it comes to qualifications for the job.
And don't forget, he also rode his bicycle to work, or at least he pretended he did. He took his limo to a block within the transportation department, then took the limo and on his bike for the photographers.
In an administration defined by virtue signaling, that stuff matters, Steve. You know that as well as I do. So Steve Moore is with us, former Trump economic advisor. Pete Mundo in for Vince Coglianese on WMAL. Take me through then, Steve. The jobs report this morning, they double expectations, but the market goes in the tank. I assume they're afraid that Powell's going to have to jack up these rates even faster and more than he was going to. Is that the driver behind that?
Well, I mean, I've criticized Biden a lot in the last 10 minutes, so I'll say something positive. I mean, we do have a very healthy now. There's no question about it. And we got a blockbuster report this morning from what's called the ADP report, which is private payrolls. And it was a big number. And so I'll be on Fox tomorrow with Maria Bartiromo when the numbers come out at 8:30 a.m. So everybody please tune in. And we don't obviously know what the numbers are yet, but I think it'll probably be another positive jobs report. So the problem isn't that there aren't enough jobs. The problem is that people are working harder and more just to try to keep up with the inflation rate, which is still running twice the level at the, he's acting like the inflation crisis is over. When I'm at the grocery store, people see me and they'll go, "Why do you keep saying inflation is only 4 or 5%? Look at the price of milk. Look at the price of these eggs. Look at the." So people don't feel like the inflation is only 4%. Most people think it's about 3 times that high.
Yeah. So then what does this mean now for Jerome Powell? I mean, there's plenty to criticize Jerome Powell for, but as I was talking about last hour, he can't get this administration to do supply-side economics, so he's got to suppress demand, right? And that's his only tool in the toolbox?
Yeah, I would like to see Jerome Powell do what Alan Greenspan did and Paul Volcker did back in the 80s, of really jawboning Congress and jawboning the White House to get your fiscal house in order. He can use the bully pulpit that he has to say, look, we're doing everything we can, but as long as the United States government continues to borrow $2 trillion a year. By the way, when I first came to Washington in 1984, the entire national debt was $2 trillion. Now we're borrowing $2 trillion every year. And that's putting incredible pressure on the Fed to have to raise interest rates. Remember, the interest rates were zero, when a little over a year ago. Now it's 5.25. I think they're talking about 2 more rate hikes. What does that affect? That affects your mortgage payment. You got credit card debt. If you're one of those people as part of that $1 trillion credit card debt, those interest rates go up. So that's a real tax on Americans as well. I think the Fed is probably likely to raise rates again, and it just puts more stress on the economy.
Do you see any way? I mean, that's a great idea for Jerome Powell to do that, Steve. Do you see any way he does do that, considering, a year and a half ago when we knew the inflation was going to start spiking, Powell did nothing about it, and he waited too long to start increasing rates? Do you see any way that he's learned his lesson, or does he basically feel like he's too indebted to this administration to do anything like that?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I don't want to get into his motives or what's going on in his head, but I will remind people that, look, the Fed is not some kind of oracle. There's this idea that these are, like God figures that know what the economy's doing. This is the guy, who just over a year and a half ago said that, remember this, that inflation was going to be transitory. Well, it wasn't so transitory. It went on month after month after month after month. So, look, I want supply-side pro-growth policies. We should be deregulating the economy. We should be producing more oil and gas and our coal, producing all the energy we have so we can get back to energy independence. I mean, look, this is the thing that frustrates me the most, Pete, having worked for Donald Trump as one of his economic advisors. And I visited him many times at the Oval Office. We talked a lot about the economy. And Trump really did. All his policies, even the ones I didn't agree with, he always basically was aiming towards putting America first, right? Mm-hmm. Put American interests first, not the interest of France and Europe and climate change and all this. What is the best for the American workers and American companies? And we had a booming economy. I remember how good it was before COVID. I mean, it was unbelievable how strong the economy was. And now we've seen a reversal. Now, what Biden's gotten is the bump from COVID being over and the businesses reopening, but we should be booming, folks. We should be growing at 3 or 4% right now. For the last 18 months, we've grown at a little over 1%. So this is the idea that this is some kind of wonder economy that Biden has created is a total fantasy.
And it seems like nothing, Steve Moore, in the next minute is going to be changing between now and next fall unless Powell goes ahead with that bully pulpit. There's nothing coming out of this White House, coming out of this economic team that's going to change the direction of what we have right now, correct?
No, in fact, they're doubling down. And I want to make, I know we only have a minute left. Here's what's scary. The Republicans in the House were able to block Biden's tax plan. If Biden put in place, and if the Democrats were to run the table in 2024, and Biden were reelected, and I don't think that's very likely, but if it did happen, then they will have a mandate from voters to put in place massive tax increase. He wants to tax some people on unrealized capital gains. He wants to double the capital gains tax. He wants to raise the dividend tax. This is all soak the rich. So if you were an investor, you'd be paying, you add all the taxes up, tax on investment. Hey, Pete, how many people do you think are going to invest in risky investments if you pay 70% tax rate?
Yeah, that's such a good point. Not a chance. Not going to happen. Not going to happen, Steve. He's the best. Steve Moore, it is always good to have him on, former Trump economic advisor, joining us here on WMAL. Steve, it's great to have you on the show. Always appreciate your time, my friend.
All right, Pete. Welcome to Washington.
Famous last words. Thanks so much, Steve. Of course, he's also the co-founder of the Committee to Unleash American Prosperity. Usually talk to Steve from KCMO in Kansas City, where I host mornings, but it's great to be on in his backyard here on WMAL. I'm Pete Mundo in for Vince Coglianese. It's good to be with you on News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, one thing the president said that, oh man. Gosh, there was some outstanding content coming out of South Carolina this afternoon. Some of it by accident. Pete Mundo out of KCMO in Kansas City in for Vince Coglianese on a Thursday afternoon on News Talk 105.9 WMAL, making sense of the news. 888-630-WMAL to join us here. So this was so good. You know, before I got to Kansas City almost 5.5 years ago now, I was working in New York City. I was freelancing at Fox News Radio and CBS and some other spots. So I know that area very well. I grew up in northern New Jersey. I went to Villanova and was in Oklahoma doing radio there, and then spent 5 years in New York City before getting out to Kansas City, which was an outstanding move for our family. My wife and I found out we were pregnant day 2 on the job here in Kansas City. We now have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old girl. I think back to my time in New York, and I know that many of you right now are sitting in incredible traffic in Washington, D.C. In Kansas City, we got a little bit. People complain about traffic, and I'm like, you don't know traffic, okay? You don't. I spent 5 years driving across the George Washington Bridge, mass transit. It was chaos. The Lincoln Tunnel, and there was this thing called the Holland Tunnel I would take once in a while as well. Well, as we heard from the president this afternoon in South Carolina, he's bragging about what he's doing when it comes to infrastructure. And apparently, I've only been gone 5 years, but apparently there's this new thing called the Hudson Tunnel I didn't know about.
Today in New York, we're investing a record to $1 billion to renew the Hudson Tunnel. You walk through that tunnel, it was built 100 years ago. It's fallen apart. You'd be able to go through it 100 miles an hour instead of 30 miles an hour.
Now, of course, when he talks about the Hudson Tunnel and a new railway between New York City and New Jersey, it is something that has been long planned, right? And it's going to get this big repair, $17 billion. But let me just suggest this. As someone who lived there for 5 years, someone who was in every corner of that city, mass transit, driving, whether it's driving through the Holland Tunnel or this Hudson Tunnel project that he's talking about here, you're not going anywhere in that town. Just like in your town. You're not going anywhere at 100 miles an hour. And by the way, why would the people in South Carolina care whether or not you could go through a tunnel in New York City a little bit faster? Do you think the people in West Columbia, South Carolina, are impressed by that or care about that? Or believe that is, I was kind of on the fence about this whole Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure part of it. But now that I know that $17 billion is going to repair a tunnel in New York City I've never heard of and I'm probably never going to be in, well, you know what? I'm sold. I was kind of on the fence, but sign me up. I'm all in. So, great. You're going to fix a tunnel that is 112 years old, a rail tunnel that connects people in New Jersey and New York. Congratulations. Just what the people in South Carolina want to hear. When you're pulling that one out of the hat, 1,000 miles away, I don't think you're making the impact that you thought you were making. Unbelievable. Never shortage of content, though. Coming up, we are going to catch you up on the latest. This Missouri v. Biden, it's the lawsuit that involves free speech. Is the government trying to shut it down through big tech? Missouri v. Biden is the official case, and we'll update you on that with the Missouri Attorney General, who's at the center of this case, coming up next. Pete Mundo in for Vince Coglianese on WMAL. Wow, so you got a judge who is suggesting that the White House was working with big tech, the government working with big tech, to limit free speech on some of the biggest social media platforms. And the Biden DOJ says, whoa, we're going to appeal this federal ruling. That's the latest on this story. By now you know what happened on Tuesday. Well, the latest in the story here is that the Justice Department is going to appeal a federal court ruling that blocked Biden administration officials from contacting social media companies because of collusion concerns. That's what the court documents show. By the way, I'm Pete Mundo in for Vince Coglianese on News Talk 105.9 WMAL, making sense of the news. And this case is officially Missouri v. Biden, and I host the morning show on KCMO in Kansas City, so it's right back in our home state. That's where this case comes out of, the state of Missouri, and the Attorney General for the state of Missouri is Andrew Bailey, and he joins us here on WMAL. We had him on my show just a couple of days ago, but there's an update, of course, as I just noted, to this story. So, Mr. Attorney General, thanks for being here. How would you respond to the Biden DOJ filing an appeal in this case?
Well, we're not going to let Joe Biden destroy free speech in America. I think that people need to start asking the White House some really tough questions about, look, if you weren't doing anything wrong coordinating with social media during COVID, why are you fighting this court order? Why not let a wall of separation between tech and state be erected? If you weren't doing anything wrong, why would you care anymore? If it was just about a response to COVID, just making sure people were protected from COVID, then why does it matter now that you canceled the pandemic, that you ended the pandemic? I mean, clearly what this evidence is the fact that they don't care. They want to continue to silence opposition, and they're not going to stop absent a court order. So that's why it's so important that we keep fighting this lawsuit and pushing it forward to hold them accountable.
Were you surprised? I mean, not that you can put anything past the people in charge here, but were you even surprised, Mr. Attorney General, that there was this appeal, or did you expect this after the ruling on Tuesday?
No, I mean, first of all, we've come to expect the unexpected, and we know they're going to continue to fight it. When we went to court on May 26th, they were unrepentant in their attitude towards the First Amendment. They don't care that they violated it in the past, and they seem committed to violating it in the future, and certainly this appeal is evidence of that. They want to continue suppressing opposition speech. Anyone that disagrees with Joe Biden, they're going to say, well, that's just not truthful, and they're going to shut it down. They're going to silence it. They're going to squelch it. The whole idea behind the First Amendment is to preserve an uninhibited marketplace of ideas. We need dispute. The First Amendment invites dispute. And any government that's silencing its opposition is stilting the scales in one direction, and it creates distrust. The whole purpose of the Constitution is to protect us from the government. That's why we need our right to free speech, and Biden seems committed to stifling that speech.
You know, we've heard this from folks over the last couple of years who have said, well, if you don't like, what Facebook's doing on the free speech front, well, go make your own Facebook, go make your own Twitter, except for when Elon Musk bought it, of course. They didn't like that too much. But, that's been kind of the talking point. But this is different, right, Andrew? This is not just big tech deciding what they want to platform and what they want to deplatform. The government alleged collusion with the big tech is where this is most concerning, and that's what takes this to the next level.
Yeah, absolutely. It's coercion and collusion. Look, from the White House lawn, President Biden said that Facebook was killing people. He called on them. He demanded that they enhance their censorship or else face his wrath in the form of an antitrust litigation and or amendment or repeal of Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which has been misconstrued to allow these big tech social media platforms to monopolize the marketplace. And so that's what allows the federal government then to collude with them to suppress American voices in violation of the First Amendment. I mean, this is scary stuff. The court has said it's dystopian. It's a dystopian scenario, that it was Orwellian. The court specifically on May 26th asked the Department of Justice if they had read the book 1984 because their behavior looked a lot like the Ministry of Truth in Oceania.
Yeah, it's so true. Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey is joining us on WMAL. I'm Pete Mundo in for Vince Coglianese. And the Missouri v. Biden is the official case that, of course, we're following here on this free speech issue. So what happens now when it comes to next steps? They file the appeal. What happens for you in Missouri?
Well, we anticipate they're going to ask for a stay of the trial court order, that they're going to want to prevent that injunction from going into place, again, because they're committed to future censorship of Americans' free speech rights. And let's also get one thing clear. The court has identified the only speech that was censored was conservative voices. So that's what they're going after. They're dedicated to it. They want to keep doing it. They got to stay the court order. We're going to fight that. We're going to make sure that injunction is in place. We got to keep erecting that wall of separation between tech and state. We'll get a 3-judge panel from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And within the next 3 to 6 months, we'll be litigating the case at the Court of Appeals, and we'll keep fighting. Once it comes back to the trial court, which we are confident in our legal position and ultimate success at the Court of Appeals. We're going to go back to the trial court and do additional discovery. We've only begun to scratch the surface. We've got to root out this vast censorship enterprise and put systems in place to prevent it from interfering with the election coming up next year.
I mean, that's a great point. When you look back to 2020 and, with the New York Post, the reporting it had with the Hunter Biden laptop story, how that got deplatformed. I mean, what's to say something like that or something of that ilk could not happen again? Can this all be figured out by, fall of 24? Or like every legal process, could it take longer than it ultimately should?
Well, that's why getting the court injunction, the nationwide injunction, was so important. And what a great way to celebrate this nation's birthday than restoring our First Amendment and the legacy of freedom our founding fathers handed down to us. And so we're so excited to get that. And so that's why it's so important to keep fighting. We've got to get that wall of separation between tech and state in place to protect our election integrity in 2024. We know that Biden targets anyone that disagrees with him. We know they want to silence opposition, and they're committed to doing it again. So we believe that the injunction will be in place. We're going to keep fighting to obtain that objective and allow Americans to be able to question Joe Biden and question his policies on big tech social media free from government censorship.
What is the responsibility of the social media companies in this? I mean, can't we get on them and just say, hey, if somebody calls you from the Biden administration, the DOJ, just hang up the darn phone? I mean, do you have to take the call? What is their responsibility in all this?
Well, first of all, I think they're ideologically aligned with the left.
Yes.
So they like Joe Biden. They like his policies. So they're more than willing to march in lockstep with this army of federal bureaucrats that Biden has sent to them. But also they're being coerced. I mean, when you've got the president of the United States saying, hey, I'm going to come after you with antitrust litigation and break up your monopolies, or I'm going to repeal the very protections that prohibit private citizens from suing you, well, then all of a sudden they're going to lose their cash cow. And so of course they're going to do exactly what he says. And that's where the coercion and collusion comes into place. The mainstream legacy media, who questions whether or not the federal government's colluding with them as well. But, they're trying to spin this as, oh, well, look, this is a safety concern. Of course the government needs to be able to communicate with big tech social media. But that's not what's going on here. The evidence we've uncovered is that there was censorship of core political speech targeting one side. And it's amazing to me there's not more concern in the mainstream media, because what if the New York Times is next? One wonders if there would still be the same wailing and gnashing of the teeth if they were the ones censored.
That is so true. Now, how does your partnership with Louisiana factor into all this? I mean, it's Missouri v. Biden, but what is the Louisiana angle here?
Well, it was great to get to partner with like-minded state attorneys general. We found that there's strength in numbers when we band together, so we were proud to be able to partner with Louisiana on this case, and certainly had a favorable venue in the U.S. District Court in Louisiana, and then ultimately there in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. There are also private plaintiffs involved here, individuals whose speech was silenced, who were deplatformed, shadow banned, de-emphasized, their privileges on big tech social media revoked at the behest of the federal government and Biden's officials. And so we have a great group of litigants here, plaintiffs pushing this lawsuit forward. We're in a good venue. And again, we're confident in our ultimate success on the merits. And that's exactly what the court order that granted the injunction says. We're likely to succeed on the merits to prove that there was a violation of the First Amendment. So there's got to be some steps taken to prevent it going forward. And again, that makes you wonder, what is the government's objective here in appealing the injunction? They're committed to violating the First Amendment going forward.
Yeah. Do you feel like you only have to prove collusion between big tech and the government, or do you also have to prove, I don't know about deplatforming maybe being the right word, but suppression of certain Facebook, Twitter, Instagram posts that may not get in line with what the government wants or this administration wants? Is it both, or is it just the former?
Well, at this point, we believe that we have put on substantial evidence to establish that there was both coercion and collusion that resulted in government-sponsored censorship. 20,000 pages of documents, numerous depositions, 155-page opinion from the judge where he lays out the evidence that we put on before him and says, hey, look, here's an email exchange from the White House to big tech social media where they say, take down that Tommy Lahren video. Here's another email where they say, take down that Tucker Carlson video. Here's another email where they say, go beyond, big tech, go beyond your own censorship policies and censor additional speech related to vaccine hesitancy. And I'm telling you, COVID was the Trojan horse that got the enemy behind the gate. COVID's over. I mean, the White House itself has ended the pandemic. And so what are they trying to censor now? I mean, we know this thing has spread and expanded. The vast censorship enterprise has grown so large that Biden's White House had to create a new bureaucratic apparatus to manage it. And so there's really serious concerns here about what speech is being censored today. That's why it is so important to keep this injunction in place and keep fighting for our right to free speech.
Well, you keep doing just that. Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey in the Missouri v. Biden case on free speech. We appreciate what you're doing. Always grateful to have you on when I'm on KCMO in Kansas City. And it's great to have you on here in Washington, D.C. on WMAL. Thanks so much for being here.
Hey, thanks, Pete. Always great to talk to you.
Absolutely. He is a great attorney general for the state of Missouri. You know, many of you may bump into, well, we've got two great U.S. senators in Missouri right now, Josh Hawley and Eric Schmidt. Eric Schmidt replaced Roy Blunt. He won election last year in 22. He was the attorney general. He's the one who began this case. And then the new attorney general, Andrew Bailey, who was appointed by our governor, he's the one who obviously has taken this thing over. So Missouri v. Biden, we'll be watching it, but he's spot on there. Like, why, if the government had no concerns and was not colluding with big tech to suppress speech, why would you file an appeal in this case? And even if you were, and you realize, geez, we've been caught, why would you file an appeal in this case? Unless you genuinely wanted to continue to suppress free speech in collusion with big tech. Let's go to clip 12. This is MSNBC, a discussion on why it might be important to make sure that the government can collude with big tech.
Furthermore, Danny, they do make exceptions. The judge makes exceptions for national security and criminal activity. But isn't there a fine line when it comes to national security specifically, especially when we're talking about elections here? The fact that election, the full faith that the American public has in elections could be undermined. Couldn't that potentially be a national security threat?
Of course, and really one of the core issues here is when and how often and to what degree can a government agency, and specifically the White House or maybe the Surgeon General or some other government agency, to what degree can they contact a private social media company and put some pressure on to advance their message? What if it is vaccinations, the importance of vaccinations? And to what degree can there be consequences for the company not doing what the White House wants? Of course, there are exceptions for national security. There are exceptions for threats and other criminal activity. But here, maybe a narrower issue for us to consider in the future is to what degree can the White House, even if that agenda is for ostensibly public health, to what degree can they engage in a pressure campaign on Facebook, Twitter, other social media companies to advance their message, even if their message is backed up by medicine and science, and then afterwards, perhaps more importantly, what kinds of consequences can they imply or otherwise suggest might happen to those who don't listen?
Okay, I've heard enough from MSNBC preaching about medicine and science for a week. Are you kidding me? Like that right there, that clip right there from MSNBC. Well, national security and vaccines and public health, Okay, well, let's pump the brakes right there. You've listened to radio, you've watched TV, right? You've digested social media for the last 2.5 years. You've seen just as much of the government message on, the COVID vax or any of that stuff as I have. We've all seen it. It's not like they can't get their word out, right? The notion that they have to have control over your speech and they don't have any kind of a platform to get their message out and get their word out, so they have to suppress your word and your beliefs and your speech. No. Those two are not joined at the hip. They're completely separate ideas. If the government wants to push a message or a narrative around national security or public health, any of that stuff, they have every right to do it, right? They've got marketing arms. We've seen it the last 2 years. But that doesn't also mean that they are allowed to or should be allowed to control your speech. As if, we're just trying to, help out the public here. And by the way, how do you define? Here's the other thing. And it was somewhat touched on in that clip, barely on MSNBC. But here's the other thing. How do you define national security? How do you define public health? You may look at it in the name of COVID, But boy, if you that is just opening up Pandora's box is what that is. To look at it and say, well, we would only do it for things like public health, air quotes. Well, suddenly there's going to be a lot of things that fit under the umbrella of public health. I promise you that. The things that you didn't even know were public health are going to be considered public health. The things that you did not even think of as being national security are going to suddenly be considered a national security issue. Therefore, we got to suppress your speech. So kudos to the Missouri Attorney General, Andrew Bailey, and Louisiana, of course, is in the mix as well. But this thing is not going anywhere, and the fact that this administration is now taking the approach of going, instead of accepting defeat and realizing that they should not be in the back pocket of big tech, they have doubled down. They said, nope, we are going to fight this one. And they may try to drag this thing on maybe through, November of 24. Who knows? Pete Mundo in for Vince Coglianese on WMAL. It's great to be here. 888-630-WMAL to join us. We wrap up the show. Coming up, I'm Pete Mundo out of KCMO in Kansas City in for Vince Coglianese. Appreciate you having me on for the last 3 hours. So the odds are changing. We gave you the odds early in the show. Bovada offshore betting site has placed odds on who the Secret Service will confirm as the owner of the cocaine found in the White House. Tour group guest is still the favorite, but it was 1-4. That means $4 to win $1. Now it's minus 150, meaning $15 down wins you 10. So it's still a heavy favorite, but Hunter Biden is now plus 150. It used to be plus 200. So odds are trending in Hunter's favor here. Also, the janitorial staff is plus 500, 5-1. The janitorial staff's getting a raw deal here. I'm telling you. I don't get that. You got to be. Come on. Paul and Frederick. Paul, I got a minute. Go ahead, my friend. It's yours.
Hey, Pete. Great conversation. You're stirring up the minds. My take is on the cocaine thing. If you have a mouse or a rat in the White House, you set up a trap. So why didn't the Secret Service leave a piece of cheese or a look-alike in its place? Even forensic files look for suspects hanging around after the crime scene. I know the Secret Service are super smart guys, unless they were told to stand down.
Well,
and
Paul,
on Hunter Biden.
I got to run, Paul. I got to run, my man. But you're right about that. It's just, here's what's amazing to me. The regime spared no expense to hunt down every human being within a mile of the Capitol on January 6th, right? But in 24 hours, someone leaves cocaine right outside the Situation Room, and it's like, well, I don't know what to tell you guys. You got us there. Appreciate Vince. Appreciate Bill Hess, the WMAL team. Corey, Dave, back in the studio. Helping us through the show, I'm Pete Mundo. Find me on Twitter, @Pete Mundo. Have a great rest of your night. Talk to you later.